First off, I'd like to thank everyone again for coming out. It's great to have another decent turnout for our chamber meal. I'd like to thank Ross for taking some time out of his evening to come and give us a presentation on the budget. Before we get going, it's a regular housekeeping rule. If you can, cell phones, if they're not on, keep them on vibrator silent. And if you got to take calls, step out of the room. Other than that, we'll get underway. So most of us know who our finance minister is, but we'll give you a brief history just in case. Ross is now celebrating his 15th year as MHA. He was first elected in the by-election April 25th of 2000. So time certainly flies by. While a member of the House of Assembly, Ross has served as Deputy Chair of Public Accounts Committee. He's chaired the Provincial Advisory Committee on Aging and Seniors. And following his victory in the general election in the district of Trinity North on October 21st, 2003, Ross was appointed the Parliamentary Secretary to the Minister of Health and Community Services and has since served in a variety of capacities. He was appointed Minister of Health and Community Services, Business Minister, Minister of Environment and Conservation, and Speaker of the House of Assembly. Now, most recently, in September of 2014, Ross was appointed the Minister of Finance and President of the Treasury Board. He's the Minister responsible for the Human Resources Secretariat, the Minister responsible for Public Service Commission. He's the Minister responsible for the Office of the Chief Information Officer, and he's the Minister responsible for Newfoundland and Labrador Liquor Corporation. He's also our MHA. So at this point, it seems like you got a lot to do, but hopefully you can spare a few minutes and tell us what you're going to do with our money.
Thanks, Brian. No trouble to do, but no trouble to come up with a solution to the one we don't have any. That's part of the challenge. That's part of the challenge. But I do really appreciate the invitation. This is something that these annual presentations to the Chamber are something that I did for a number of years, and it was always the first meeting that followed the budget. And then when I got elected as Speaker, I had to be non-partisan. So you recall for the last few years we've had the Minister of Finance out here to do what I'm about to do this evening. So it's a real pleasure to resume that role again. I don't have to be worried about being partisan anymore now. I can say what I want politically and get away with it. But no, it's a real pleasure to be here. And I do want to move that down so it's not in my face. How's that? Still hear me? I want to talk a little bit about the budget and some of the things that you may have heard already in the news, but I'll give you a little bit of a flavor for what we're trying to do with this year's budget. And then when we're done, if you have an interest, if there's some questions that you may have, then I'm going to be glad to answer the questions. But I want to give you a bit of a flavor for what we're trying to do with this year's budget. You know, Newfoundland and Labrador finds itself in a very different spot than we've been for the last number of budgets. You might recall the very first time that I did this after 2003 when we formed government. My first budget that I came and talked to you about after forming government was 2004, and I think Paul is still in the room today. I think Paul's comment after I spoke was, you had some guts to come out here and talk about this budget. And so a lot of water under the bridge since that time. A lot of changes have occurred in Newfoundland and Labrador. And we've enjoyed a tremendous amount of prosperity and growth during that period of time. And Clarenville and the area has been a part of that growth and prosperity that we've all experienced. But we're going to return to that. Well, we find ourselves in a bit of a spot now where we're going through a bit of a transition. So I want to share with you some of the thinking that we have as a government and some of the approaches that we're going to take to dealing with some of those issues. Because this is a budget that reflects a current day reality. And I'd like to share with you now some of the things that we've had to consider. And not so much detail about what's contained in the budget, but I want to talk to you a little bit about our approach, some of the things we have to give consideration to as we proceeded with this budget, and some of the things that will be impacting us as we move forward. Budget balancing choices and a promising future. Because clearly this budget is about choices, but it's also making sure that we're well positioned to take advantage of the future. So this budget outlines our government's plan for growth and prosperity as we move forward for the next 10 years. And this will help us, I believe, weather the storm that we're going to be facing, particularly during the next 5. The global impacts and the volatility of a resource-based economy are impacting all of us in Newfoundland and Labrador. I was commenting before dinner, the Newfoundland and Labrador has always been a resource-based economy, whether it's been the fishery, mining, the paper industry, Now it's oil and gas and mining. So we've always been a resource-based, and that's not going to change, despite lots of conversations about diversifying the economy, and there's been a fair bit of that taking place, and there will continue to be a fair bit of diversification take place. But we'll always be a resource-based economy, so we need to capitalize on that resource that we have and make sure that we get maximum value for all Newfoundlanders and Labradorians while we're harvesting that resource. It is essential that the government and the residents of Newfoundland work together collaboratively, though, to work ourselves through this process. Through the wealth that we've generated in the last 10 years particularly, and most of that's come from offshore oil royalties, and that's made us, I don't want to overwork the phrase, but we became a have-not province many years ago. And there's a bit of an irony to that, and that doesn't mean that we became filthy rich overnight, and that we now have lots of money and will always have lots of money, but it has more to do with the fact that we are now reliant on our own source revenues. We're no longer reliant on transfers from Ottawa. So when an economy and the resources that we have, something happens to the value of those resources, we find that we don't have the crutch to rely on and those transfer payments. So we have to manage the resource we have, because we'll get the value of it when it's high, but we'll also have to work our way through it in a period like we find ourselves in today. Now, as we apply those newfound revenues strategically to make investments that are going to sustain us for the long term, and that's what we've done. You think about for a moment the kind of investments we've made in education, the investments we've made in healthcare, the kind of investments we've made in municipal infrastructure. All of those have put us in a position where we now have a solid foundation as we move forward, position ourselves for the next number of years. Now, to help us through this process, we're thinking about how we wanted to do this and what should we do. We needed to be guided by something. We needed to make sure that we're well grounded and founded in the decisions we make and the kind of direction that we take. And we've developed a set of principles that will help us navigate these rough waters. A set of principles that we've used to guide some of the decisions that we've made and some of the choices that we've had to make in this budget that we delivered last week. And I'll just share those with you very briefly and make some comments for you. First thing, we wanted to cultivate a culture of cost management. And one of the things that we've done this year is we've started to look at more fundamentally our cost structure in government. We're now going to be involved in a process, and the Premier has asked me to guide this process as President of the Treasury Board, to guide us through a process of looking, trying to embed within the public sector a culture of cost management. Fundamental shift in how we do business and how we think about things. And I'll share with you some of the approaches that we're going to use as we do that. Secondly, we want to refocus our health services. We've got 4 healthcare authorities in this province, each doing some of the same kinds of things, focusing on, yes, the delivery of health services, but they each have support mechanisms in place. They each have their own purchasing services. They each have their own supply chain management structures. They each have their own payrolls. And they each have their own accounting services, their own IT departments, and the technology and the mainframes to run all the information systems that they have. All 4 of them have it. And what we're doing now is we're going to collapse those kinds of activities together with those issues or those activities of the Centre for Health Information. And the Centre for Health Information deals primarily with health informatics. We're going to collapse that into one. All those back office functions will be collapsed into one. Payroll can be done from anywhere. We can have payroll done for the 4 health authorities in St. Anthony. It can be done in Clarenville. It can be done in Randall. It really doesn't matter where that's done. It's all technology driven. And so it can be done, it's transactional activity. But we don't need to have 4 of them in a province this size. So we're going to bring that together. We're going to start looking at and Paul, you'd be interested in this, comment about the College of North Atlantic. We need to fundamentally refocus the college. We need to look at the college's role in the future. We need to align its function and its future with the labor market. We need to be responsive to what's happening, and because it's changing. Paul, you might recall when you started in the college system 20 years ago, the system was very different than it is today. The labor market demands were very different than it is today. And it's going to change more in the next 20 years. And the college needs to be in a position to respond to that. And we'll create centers of excellence. And Clarenville is a real good example. We have a center of excellence here with respect to distributed learning. The college's distributed learning system run out of here. So this is a center of excellence for distributed learning with the College of North Atlantic. We have other opportunities around the province to create other centers of excellence so we can really focus our energy and our talent and our financial and human resources in making sure that we're able to respond more quickly to the changing labor markets. So that's we need to fundamentally start looking at how we do that. The other thing, size of public service. We've got 46,000 people working in public service in the Newfoundland Labrador, core government departments and boards and agencies. In fact, it represents over 19% of the entire workforce in the province. So we need to realign that workforce. We believe over the next 5 years, through attrition, because there's going to be some 9,500 people eligible to retire in the next 5 years. We believe through attrition, we'll be able to take out at least 1,400 of those by just virtue of having every 2 out of 10 leaving, not replacing, by re-engineering and realigning work processes. It goes back to that issue around cost management and focusing on efficiencies. And that can happen without having any impact on the delivery of programs and services in the province. And there will be other opportunities like identified by Minister of Health and Community Services where consolidation of some of those back office functions, again through attrition, we'll be able to realize additional savings as we actually realign not only the functions themselves, but realign the staff associated with those functions. So through attrition management, we'll be able to make some realignments in that public service. What's the appropriate size? What's the right size? That's something we need to better understand. 4,600 is probably too many. What is the right size, though? And we need to better understand what that is. What we're trying to do in this process, and there's been many, and some of you who, as a chamber, there's been other business organizations and groups that indicated that their belief is that we should massively make huge changes by having some major layoffs. And I'll speak to that in a moment because that has a huge impact on our economy. We need to be very careful of what we do and how we do things so as not to have a negative impact on the economic circumstance of the province. The other thing we want to start doing is looking at our long-range infrastructure plan. You have, Paul, thanks very much, by the way, for distributing those. You have on your tables 2 documents. One is the budget highlight document, which I'll speak to in a moment. The other one is an infrastructure document. In front of that, it lays out some of the infrastructure expenditures that we've had in the last couple of years. And the back part shows the infrastructure plan as we move forward. As much as we got a 5-year fiscal plan to look at how we provide programs and services, we also have a 5-year infrastructure plan. It's ratcheted it back a little bit from where we were, but there is a 5-year plan. Still a pretty aggressive program. And in the back, you'll see some significant investments that we're proposing to make in infrastructure in the next 5 years. But it's a long-term plan. We've committed to a number of projects in recent years, and we're going to deliver on them. The last, what you see in the front of that book, represents a portion, only a portion, of the $6 billion that we've spent on infrastructure in the last 8 or 9 years. You don't need to look very much further than this district to see some of that investment. Look at the new event center, look at the new long-term care center, look at the new protective care unit that's under construction, look at some of the things we've done with road and municipal infrastructure in town. So this community, this district, has benefited in a big way from that $6 billion investment. And if you look at some of the other announcements we made last week, we're going to continue to do that. Because one of the projects we're going to advance is an expansion to Riverside Elementary in Shoulder. The new gymnasium and classrooms to be expanded. A couple years ago, we expanded with a $7 million investment, and we didn't complete it. Now we're going to come back and complete it, which includes a gymnasium and some classrooms. And there's money in this year's budget to appoint a consultant to start that process. So there's significant investments that we've made in infrastructure throughout the province, and as I've said, this district and this town has been one of the benefactors of that kind of investment. And we're going to continue to do that. And if you look at that book, particularly, the K-12 system is a real focus on education and their children. Huge investment in K-12 infrastructure over the course of the next 5 years. So if you think about where we're going and what we've done, $6 billion is a lot of money. And we're going to continue. We've been spending on an average of $700 million a year. This year, even though we're referring to it as ratcheting it back a bit, we're still going to be over $650 million this year. Next year, over $550 million. The year after that, over $550 million. So we still got a really aggressive infrastructure plan. to be able to respond to some of the other infrastructure needs throughout the province. The other principle I want to talk a little bit about is regional clusters. We had a conversation a moment ago at this table about, municipal governance. I was asked a question about whether or not there's some consideration of a county governance structure. Fundamentally, if we're going to continue to grow and prosper as a province, given the manner in which our population is distributed and the changing demographics that are in this province, we need to start working more strategically as regions, looking how we benefit from working together, collaboratively. And so we're going to be doing some work with the municipalities organizations to look at what might be a different governance model for the future, while at the same time maintaining individual unique identities of communities. This is not about forcing people to amalgamate. This is about how we can come together in a region to collaboratively share programs and services, reduce our costs, become much more efficient, ensuring that we have strong economies and industries within those regions, whether it's fishery, whether it's tourism, or whether it's something else, making sure that we have an economic base to be able to grow and continue to prosper. It gives us the ability to be able to put in place the kind of social programs and infrastructure that we need to sustain these communities for a long, long time. That can only be done in partnership with each other. That can only be done with regions and communities coming together and working collaboratively for a common goal, which is make sure that each region is strong, needs to be vibrant, and well positioned for the future. So we're going to be forcing communities to start coming together in an amalgamation fashion, but purely to start seeing the value and benefit of working together. And we want to support that. We want to support it with strategic investment in infrastructure. We want to support it by investing in industries and technology that come to those regions to continue to make sure that we have a strong economic base. The other huge issue, the seventh issue, the implementation of a strategy around deficit reduction. This year, we're going to have a deficit of about $1.1 billion, 1.093. It's a lot of money. However, it's a block of money that we believe we can manage. We need to be able to gradually roll back that deficit. We find ourselves in a spot this year where all revenues is significantly diminished from what we've enjoyed the last couple of years. And we had to make some choices. We could run out today, as some have suggested, and plan to take out $1.5 billion out of our economy, and $1.5 billion out of public sector spending over the course of the next 1 to 3 years. And that would cripple our economy. That's not practical. It doesn't make a whole lot of sense to try to do something like that in a short period of time. Where we are today came about for a reason that we had no control over. If oil revenues had continued at the rate that we had been forecasting, and the advice we had been given was going to keep us around 105 for a number of years. If oil revenues had maintained at that level, there was still some tweaking we need to do in our expense stream, but not to the order of magnitude we now need to do it. So we need to exercise discipline, make balanced decisions, make choices, to map ourselves from today out to 5 years' time and return to surplus. The economy that the slowdown that we're experiencing today in the economy, that's going to be changing, starting to change in late 2018. But by the time we get into 2019, the economy is going to be picking up again. We're going to be in a position to return to a balanced budget in 1920 and a surplus in 2021. We can do that a couple ways. Number one, revenues are going to start climbing again. Number two, with a really strong focus on cost management and debt management, we're going to find ourselves back into the surplus in 2021 again. And that's what requires some discipline though. It requires some sharp focus and sometimes some difficult choices that we'll have to make. But they'll be balanced choices. And on balance, we'll be able to get us where we want to be in 2021. The eighth thing that the Premier is committed to is the establishment of a generations fund. There's been lots of discussion around having a heritage fund, having some money put aside for a rainy day, and citing what Alberta has done, and citing what Norway has done, and we should have been doing the same thing. But there's a reality. We're now doing what Norway is doing. I mean, they had 20 years in the oil business before they established their fund. They had produced some 5 billion barrels of oil before they had done what we're about to do. So 20 years sounds like a long time, and for those of us here in Clarenville, saw the first rig being built at Blair some 20 odd years ago. So we were on the front end of seeing that. But that's not all that long ago. For those of us who are around and remember it. It sounds like a long time, but 20 years ago is when we started pumping oil. So we've not been in the oil business a long time. We've been talking about it a long time. As Brian Peckford pulled up that little days of oil that time, 30 odd years ago. But we've only been in the business 20 years. But now our time has come to establish that generations fund. And when we return to surplus, we'll establish through legislation an entity that identifies a percentage of the revenue we generate from oil and gas going into a fund. It'll not be there just as a contingency fund if we run into a bad time and we need to fund a deficit, but truly a fund that will be there for future generations when the oil is gone. Because oil is not a non-renewable resource. So someday it will be gone. And that generations fund will be there for people to enjoy when that happens. So as we start looking at where we want to be, what that 5-year outlook looks like, when we return to that surplus in 2021, we want to make sure that we have the kind of infrastructure, the kind of social programs that are going to hold us in good stead as we get and move ourselves well into the future. One of the things that I wanted to talk a little bit about is our fiscal management plan. And because there's lots of, one of the things that this kind of a budget conjures up in discussion is how do you manage your finances? How are you going to monitor this? What are some of the objectives that you set up? And is it real? Can you achieve it? This is the first time, I just want to, this budget document here called the highlights. For those of you who have been following provincial budgets in this province, this is the very first time in our history that we've had a 5-year budget. Never before in the history of the province has anyone ever produced a 5-year plan, fiscal plan. It's mapped out here, tells you year over year where we're going to be. On page 2 it talks about what year 1 is going to look like, what year 2 is going to look like, and what year 3 is going to look like. And that's our 5-year plan. And just to make sure that we're on target, on the opposite page, on page 3, you'll see some graphs. These are our targets. You could come up with another dozen or so performance indicators to measure how well you're managing the fiscal affairs of the province. These are some key indicators that rating agencies use, the banks that will lend us money will use. They will use these as some of the key indicators. This is the first time you've ever seen a government in this province publish not only their fiscal plan for 5 years, the first time that they publish performance measurement indicators. And on an annual basis when the budget comes down, and when we do our mid-year update, we'll report on those indicators. So people will be able to track us, track our performance, hold us account for our commitment. Because this is how we'll measure our performance, and this is how you'll be able to measure our performance as well. Those two things have never appeared in the budget of this province ever before. We believe with discipline and with focus, and an understanding of the current fiscal situation, and an understanding of the economy of this province, that these are all achievable goals. And we will be able to return to a surplus in 2021. But it's going to require some discipline and some focus. So as we go through this process, make some changes. We're talking about measuring our debt to GDP. We're talking about the size of our debt and how much we can service. This budget calls for, over the course of this year, a $2 billion worth of borrowing. And over the course of the next 5 years, or actually the budget forecast is for 5 years, we're only going to be borrowing for 4 of those. And so we're going to be borrowing close to $5 billion over the next, in this 5-year cycle that we're talking about here, we're going to be borrowing some $5 billion. We've got some debt that we're going to retire in that period, so we're not totally increasing it by a full $5 billion. But that's a lot of borrowing that we're going to do, but we're going to manage that process. And our debt servicing cost will never be greater than 13%. And if you look at the graph that measures our indicators, when we came to government back in 2003, that number was around 27%. 27 cents on every dollar we took in was for debt servicing. We made a commitment. Over the next 5 years, we will not exceed 13%. We're going to be able to manage our way through that. So those indicators are very precise, measurable, and we'll be held accountable for them. One of the things that we started talking about borrowing a lot of money, $2 billion is a lot of money in any one year, and $5 billion is a lot over any period of time. But if you think about for a moment what we're going to be borrowing that money for, we're going to be borrowing that money for some very strategic investments. Number one, we're going to be borrowing some money, and over the next 3 years, we're going to be borrowing some $1.5 billion put into Nalcor. We're going to be borrowing money, that infrastructure that I talked about a moment ago. We're going to borrow money for that infrastructure. The third thing we're going to borrow money for is our unfunded liability of our pension plan. Every one of the public sector pension plans was going to be bankrupt. The first one was going to hit in 2030. The others were headed in the same direction. It's like having a line of credit. It was continuing to grow. All of you got lines of credit to run your business. If you had a line of credit that was continuing to grow year over year over year, and finally got to the point where the bank said, "You're not extending it anymore. You've gone too far. You've got to set this up as a term loan, start repaying. Because if you don't, it's going to go bankrupt." So what we've done is we've converted those unfunded pension liabilities into a term loan. And we got a commitment on an annual basis to repay it. And in 30 years out, we'll have it done, and the plans will be fully funded. But we need to make the commitment to pay for it on an annual basis. So for the next 3 years, while this revenue shortfall we've had, we got to borrow for those three things. So just look at the three of them. I'm just giving you an explanation of the pension fund, of why we're having to do that. The infrastructure. The investments we're going to make in infrastructure today is going to be there for decades to come. So future generations will get the value of that infrastructure. So borrowing for infrastructure, this generation values, and will get value from. Future generations will get value from. It's like buying a house. Buy a house, you can't afford to write a check for it today, so you get a mortgage. So over the next 25, 30 years, you pay for it. And that's what we're doing with this infrastructure. 4 years out, though, we won't have to do that. Just like we didn't have to borrow for the $6 billion that we spent. We'll all be able to do it from cash flow. The other thing with Nalcor, there's been lots of criticism about how much we put into Nalcor. Let me just share four quick facts with you about Nalcor. In 2008, Nalcor was created as a corporate entity in 2006, but in 2008, we gave Nalcor for our first investment. From 2008 to 2018, when we make the last investment in Nalcor, we will have put in over $3.1 billion into Nalcor. A lot of money. 10 years, $3.1 million. Starting in 2018, in the next 8 years, we're going to get all of that back through dividends. So 3.1 in 10 years, every cent of it back in 8. And then for the 17 years that follow that, we'll get back an additional $12 billion. And from every year that on, particularly when the upper church comes back to us, we will be in excess of $1 billion annually coming from Nalcor forever and a day. So when someone says, how come you're dumping money into Nalcor, and is that a good investment? Just think of the math. 3.1 in 10 years, every cent back in 8, and then the next 17 years, you get $12 billion additional, and you're on track for over $1 billion a year for the rest of your life. Not a bad deal. You 10 more then, exactly. And that's what Nalcor is. So when we talk about borrowing money over the next 4 or 5 years, just think about why we're borrowing and how that makes sense. The Nalcor money takes care of itself. The infrastructure will be there for decades to come, and we only have to borrow for it for a 3-year period. And then we'll be back to doing the rest of the infrastructure with cash. And the other piece is the pension funds. And if they went bankrupt, here's the interesting thing. If they went bankrupt, it's not just the public sector employees who would lose from that. Because the way the fund is set up, taxpayers of the province were still obligated for the commitments made to the pensioners. So it's not that you were off the hook. The fund would have been bankrupt, not enough money in it to pay out to the pensioners, but as taxpayers, we all would have, because the way that the pension is set up, all would have had to honor the monthly commitments of all those retirees. So that's why we're borrowing money. And so when we start talking about borrowing, we have to think about it, is it reasonable? Can we afford it? Are the upper limits of what we can afford? We can't continue to borrow forever and a day, nor can we afford to borrow large amounts of money or larger than we're proposing. So that's why, if you look at those performance indicators, we've also said we'll set a cap on borrowing. we're only prepared to borrow so much. And we put a cap on that based on what other performance indicators we've got here, because we know what we can afford. And we know we can afford that because we'll pay it back. And the money that we're going to put into the pension plans, because Melker takes care of itself, the infrastructure is there for decades. The other borrowing we'll do, when we return the surplus, we'll all pay it back within 10 years. So this won't be a noose around someone's neck in 25 or 30 years out. It's a temporary problem we find ourselves having here, and we'll work our way through it in a short period of time. So that's the kind of, the investments that we made, the kind of commitment that we made to using our fiscal resources and the money that we have available to us in this year's budget. There's a number of things that we've done in this budget that I already alluded to one of them, and that benefits this area, the infrastructure investment. We got $500,000 in this year's budget to hire the consultants, start to do the design work for the expansion to Riverside. And when the money is in the cash flow in those out years that I talked about, when the design is done, we're able to proceed and then use that piece of work. There's another small project through the federal government we're paying for. They're doing it. They're doing some renovations to the attachment to the RCP here this year. And they do it. They send us a bill, we reimburse them for it after, so there'll be some enhancements to the attachment. There'll also be some significant infrastructure investments in roads in the region through our municipal infrastructure program. The town is in the middle of a 3-year infrastructure project as we now speak. And I think this is the second year of a 3-year plan.
Yeah,
so
we're discussing tonight this road going down here. That's going to be done in the summer.
So there'll be lots of new infrastructure through the municipal infrastructure program that is already in place. And then our provincial road program. There'll be investments. It doesn't impact Clarenville as a town itself, because the provincial roads are outside the town, but it does impact the region. It does impact people that are traveling here. It does impact tourism and people who travel into, particularly in the Clarenville, to do business with most of the who have businesses here. Other people come in from outside. So that road infrastructure, that investment in transportation infrastructure is critical for us. So these are the kinds of things that we're trying to do as we move forward. It's one of the things that I want to talk a little bit about as well. The temporary nature of the position we find ourselves in. We believe that the circumstance that we're in today has come about as a result of one thing. The price of oil has dropped. Global issue. We have no control of it, can't influence it. We've got to manage our way through it though. And that's why we've mapped out a 5-year plan. That's why we want to do this incrementally. Because this budget is about the choices we've had to make. Because when we start talking about making choices, every time you make a choice, there's a consequence. And you make a choice among many options. So we could have done a number of things. We could have made some radical cuts in expenditure and done it in a very short period of time. We laid out hundreds and hundreds of people and cut expenditures in a variety of program areas. It would undermine the great work that we've done in the last 10 years, number one. Number two, it would destabilize the economy, which is already starting to in decline and will be for the next couple of years before it rebounds in 2019. There would have been a significant consequence for that. And then when we started to rebound, we wouldn't have been in a position to take full advantage of the economic value of that rebound had we done that, because we'd be trying to pull ourselves out of the mess we created by doing it. So the choice we made is about balance. We've made some significant decisions around reduction of expenditures. We've made decisions around how we would borrow in a managed way, in a responsible way. We've developed a plan that takes us through the next 5 years. And we've got targets to measure our performance, and people like yourselves to measure our performance. And we've got an eye on the future. Because one of the things that is extremely important for all of us to understand, I believe, is that what the circumstance we find ourselves in now is one, it's a temporary one. There's tremendous opportunity still in the Plant Labrador. Huge opportunity in the future. And we don't want to do anything today that undermines our ability to capitalize on that. This province has as bright a future today as it had 5 years ago. And we want to make sure that we don't lose sight of that reality in the budget decisions we make now. We want to make sure that we position ourselves well to recover from it and make the right choices, balanced choices. So this budget has been about choice, it's been about balance, It's been about making prudent decisions, and it's been about having an appreciation and an understanding of the tremendous potential that exists in Newfoundland and Labrador, and what it takes to make sure we're positioned to take full advantage of it. And we believe that this budget helps us do that. But it requires a commitment on everybody to be a part of a process here when we start talking about those principles, as we look at how we take advantage of those opportunities and how we position ourselves to do just that. And we believe this budget helps us do that. Because there's nothing to be gained at all by having an overreaction to a circumstance we find ourselves in, because it will just undermine our ability to capitalize on the potential. The future is still bright. This region, and you people know this better than anyone, when the economy of this province has been chugging along in the last 8 or 10 years, look at the tremendous prosperity that we've enjoyed here. Look at the growth we see. Look at the housing starts, commercial starts, the investment in infrastructure. That's been because we've made strategic investments. We, meaning municipal governments, businesses, provincial government, collectively, recognizing opportunity, recognizing potential, making the right kind of investment to take advantage of those opportunities. And that's why we've enjoyed the prosperity here in this region. That's why we've enjoyed the prosperity as a province, because we've never lost sight of the opportunity, never lost sight of the potential that exists, and never lost sight of recognizing that we have the talent and the skill to be able to execute a plan to take full advantage of those opportunities. And that's what this budget attempts to do. And we believe, when executed, that it will deliver for us in 5 years' time a rebound that will well position us to take advantage of the years beyond that. Whether it's oil and gas, whether it's mining and other resource technologies that we're going to develop, Arctic opportunities that exist, in the kinds of things that are developing around us as a province today, and investments are still high. Look at capital investment today, it's still healthy. Employment income, highest it's ever been, second only to Alberta. Last 10 years, the kind of employment growth that we've experienced, unprecedented in this province. The unemployment numbers, unprecedented in this province. We just find ourselves in a bit of a glitch. And we'll work our way through that. And this budget, we believe, is a balanced approach with the right choices to get us through that. Thank you. Any questions? I'd be really glad if we've got some time. Time's of your evening. If anyone has a question, we've got to answer.
At the 30,000-foot level, I never heard anything in the budget, nor from government really, with respect to diversifying the economy. You know, 30% of our revenue is tied to oil. We're not great in that. And we're at the end of the dog's tail. You know, we've seen that when times are good, when you're 105 or 110 dollars a barrel, you know, we were doing well and spending money well. Now we're down at the 50 range. I haven't heard a lot from government with regards to anything we can do in order to break that dependence on that one item. It used to be fish, look what happened there, now it's oil, we're in that situation. I don't know if government is actively looking at that, I think.
Absolutely. This is an interesting question. You hear about a lot. Let's diversify the economy so we don't have to rely on oil. Let's diversify the economy so we don't have to rely on fish. We had 3 paper mills and fishing for a long time. That was stable. And that equalization. So we should diversify our economy so we get off equalization. We don't have to rely on paper. Back to the comment I made earlier. We've been a resource-based economy since Cap came.
Right.
And let's be practical about what we need to do as a province. You got to play to your strength. We weren't going to be able to go head-to-head with Ontario in manufacturing. Where we were from the raw material in the market. So we're never going to have a manufacturing economy. Small-scale manufacturing, very successful here. With some people in the manufacturing sector who are doing quite well and will continue to do well. But to say that we'll have a big piece of our economy in manufacturing, probably not going to happen. But let's look at where our strengths are. Look at where we are geographically and the Arctic. Tremendous opportunities in the Arctic. The amount of work that we've been doing in the last 5 years in particular, in research and development, the kind of companies that are operating out of Newfoundland and Labrador, positioning themselves to advance through the Arctic. Phenomenal growth in that industry in the last couple of years. Look at what we're seeing in the knowledge-based economy. So look around, we have one here in Clarenville, Subsea. Now Subsea is not a company that relies on oil and gas per se. But the technologies that they're using, technologies that they've developed, came about as a result of us having an oil and gas industry here. So they're one of many companies, knowledge-based companies, technology companies, that have grown here because we have had, because of an oil and gas industry, we've had an ability to attract the talent, to give us the critical mass that we need of that kind of talent to grow that industry. We've got companies who started here in this province, some of them moved in, some of them grew out of this province, serviced the oil and gas industry, who are now exporting products, both products that they're manufacturing and the talent that they've been able to recruit internationally to help other jurisdictions in their oil industry. So they're attached to the oil industry. We have nothing to do with the oil off our shore. It's grown because of the oil and gas industry. So we're capitalizing on our natural strength. The notion, though, just think about this for a moment. The notion that you could take any one of those sectors and think that you'd be able to grow it big enough to give you a couple of $1 billion a year of revenue from corporate taxation. It's corporate taxation at 14%. If they're manufacturing, they're at 9%. If they're small business, and that's the high threshold for income, is at 5%. Look at the kind of profit they need to make, the numbers that you need to have to replace $2 billion. So just mathematically, just think of that for a second about how you diversify your economy. So if I mapped out for you every single company, and Subsea being one of them, I could give you a list of 25 companies that are like that. They got a dozen people working for them, doing quite well, young, talented people. They are contributing to that diversification. The number of emerging companies that are focused solely on the Arctic, but are doing it out of here, focused solely on the Arctic, that have grown in the last 10 years in this province is phenomenal. So that's a part of that gradual diversification. Collectively, though, the cumulative benefit of all of those together, and the wealth that they generate, and the tax they pay, will never replace that $2 billion worth of oil. And that's just and whether, I'm saying that about oil today, I could have stood here 20 years ago and said the same thing about fishery. And 15 years back from that, said the same thing about mining, fishery, and paper industry. That's been our story. The challenge we've had, I think, in the past, is we've not played to the strength and tried to develop emerging industries and technologies from those sectors that we're playing, and that's what we're doing now. There's companies that are here because of the oil and gas who aren't necessarily getting money from oil and gas that's off our shore. But we now have the cluster, we have that critical mass to attract others here to do the same thing. And that's the difference. That's the difference. So I wouldn't try to kid anyone to suggest that we're going to diversify ourselves sufficient enough to wean ourselves off oil and gas and mining. If you think about, just look at this highlight document again. And I wanted to go right to page 9 of that document. This just shows you the capacity and potential that we've got. We've heard about the North Sea and the tremendous revenue from oil and gas in the North Sea. I mean, if you think about the size of our field off Newfoundland and Labrador relative to the size of the North Sea, when we're fully developed, we've only got 5% of our confirmed finds right now, 5% of our confirmed resource base out there under production. Now, if you think about the potential that we've not yet confirmed, and compare that to what the North Sea did for Norway, it's phenomenal the capacity we have. So as much as it's important to talk about taking advantage of other emerging industries, and we will, and have done that, and continue to do it, but we also need to acknowledge that oil and gas, hydropower, wind, we've got all kinds of capacity here in terms of, we've got Muskrat Falls coming out, Gull Island behind it, we'll have the Upper Churchill in 2041, tremendous opportunity for wind, other sources of power. We're not going to be, we're not stranded anymore, we're going to be tied in, 2 connections to the mainland. This is a different time, very different time. And the opportunities that are under our horizon are tremendous. We just need to manage it right. Can't screw it up. The consequences so severe. because of what you just said. We don't have the breadth of industries to say, that one fails, we're going to find because we have a bunch of others. We just need to get it right, because we've got a few opportunities, energy being one of them. And that's the diverse sector, as we all know. And with hydro, what we're doing with Nel, that's why I made that comment about the investment we made. A $3 billion investment. And look at when we're going to get it back. That's huge. That's monumental. That's a game changer for us. So getting it right is important.
I got a quick question, and it only just come to me. I travel around the province quite a bit with my work, and I go to some unique places sometimes. Today I was over behind Bay Roberts and in the back country a little bit. I'm trying to remember the road. But there's a lot of farmland in there. And I didn't realize it until a few years ago, the first time I went in there. But yet it's unutilized farmland. But we talk about, I guess, agricultural and feeding our province. So we always talk about sometimes if the ferry don't get across, things aren't in our grocery stores sometimes. We're a little bit, it's a bit of a unique situation for a province that we feel we're so modern and with everything that we have here, but sometimes we're vulnerable to that situation. So I guess just off the cuff, but why is it that we're looking at agriculture as a source of employment and opportunity for the province, but yet there's places like that have a lot of land developed, but yet there's no farms over there, and apparently there's a lot of farmers that are not doing anything over there. Is there a reason for that, Ross? I just come off the cuff. I didn't know you didn't know anything about it, or
there's a couple of reasons I think for it. Number one, what you're raising is there's a tremendous opportunity in this province. Food security is a huge issue, and not just for us as a province, but as a nation. And we've got many of the firms that exist today, the small family firms, and people are staying in the family business. So a piece of that's going on. We've got some areas on the west coast where we've had some real success, because there's been some real good work done in research and development. The federal government over the last number of years have weaned themselves away from a lot of the work that they were doing in research. You know, and on Brookfield Road, that research firm is there, Fed's had, and they've really ratcheted that back in the last 8 or 9 years. And the province has picked up some of that research and development. So there's some really interesting things being done on the west coast, especially around the Cormac area. A couple of young farmers over there have done some really good work in being able to have crops that have longer growing season. We've been able to conquer some of the disease problems that we have in our soil for transporting the product out the province. And so they've been able to do some unique things that was on a small scale. But you're right that there's tremendous opportunity to do it. We've had a program for a number of years now where we provide funding to assist people to get startups, clear land, provide access to it by road, and get the first crop in the ground.
yeah.
But even with those kind of financial incentives, people have to be interested and attracted to the industry, into the business. And that's not always been easy. Around the Lethbridge area, just look at our doorstep. Lethbridge area has been an area that we've all known to be, most of the farming done around here has been done in that area. And these are again family businesses. And in recent years, as generations have moved on, newer generation has been interested in carrying on the family business. And they've started to change. And this farming is not, the Newfoundland Labrador is not unique in that respect. A lot of these farms across the country are family-run businesses. And once you skip a generation, it's difficult to come back.
They moved to a lot of this.
Well, that's part of it. I guess it's like the fishery. People traditionally in the fishery. So, yeah, no, I was over there today doing some work, and I've done some work in the last couple of years for farmers. And so sometimes it brings me to some of these places, and all of a sudden you look at it, and it's almost like a retired farming area. There's a lot of land cleared, and obviously that's an older community over there, like those communities in that area of the province.
A piece of work you did over in Musgrave and Bloomfield at Bundersville Road a couple of years ago.
Yeah.
That was all crops one time, and now it's all dairy.
Yeah.
Same thing. So that's, but it is a tremendous opportunity, but getting people into the business has been a challenge, despite having financial incentives to help you do that.
Thank you very much, Ron.
Russ, one comment I wanted to, you never mentioned tourism, you mentioned the big ones, but those those commercials that we see on TV, the NTV News, you get a nice commercial, CBC, and the government, the provincial government came up with these a few years ago, and like, me living here in Newfoundland, looking at those commercials, like, I want to go to Fancy Meadows here. And like, tourism means a lot to,
Huge.
like, here's a big community like Clarenville, with Rocky Harbour, Old Hurlington, Trepassey, tourism, like their bed and breakfasts. So, like, those commercials, like, keep that up as a government, and, but is there anything we can do? We know how much it costs to get off the rock. Like, get people on the rock for tourism, because there's lots of job opportunities there in tourism.
Beans, we just, in fact, this year, I didn't mention, but we didn't intend to give a long shopping list of investments we made. We put additional money this year into that advertising campaign,
Yes.
grew last year, grew it again this year. Even though times are tough, but we recognize the value of that industry. And you mentioned about small communities and large communities. Let's not kid ourselves. In the region we're in, the Peninsula region, is one of the most popular destination points for tourism in the entire province. Ourselves and Northern Peninsula are probably two of the most popular spots in the province. And we tend not to think of ourselves living here in Clarenville of being a tourist community. But if you think about it for a moment, and look around in the summertime, number of people who spend money in this town, it's tourism money. They're coming through here, they're staying here, this place here, this hotel, summertime, full of people who are traveling here. Tourist is a big business in small, medium. Bonavista Peninsula has been done a tremendous job in developing product. They got something to sell, they got something that they're promoting. And Clarenville is a bit unique in that respect, and it has a different kind of history than maybe Trinity or Bonavista. But we're the gateway to the Bonavista Peninsula.
I say to Betty, she sees them once, we see them twice.
Because they're eating here, they're staying here, they're buying groceries here. So the entire region, whether you're on the Cape in Bonavista or you're here in Clarenville, every single one of us see a value in that industry in this region. And it's big business. The unfortunate thing sometimes is the last couple of years, the cost of getting on the Isle by ferry has gone up, and that's a problem. But people are flying in, renting cars and traveling the province. It still is a popular destination spot, and people will keep coming. And the visitors are increasing year over year over year. So we have a great product, we have a great province. Weather can be better sometimes, but that's not what they come here for. And they come here for the tourists, the sights, and the people, and hospitality, and food, and all the other good things we offer. Anyway, thanks very much. Appreciate your time and your interest.